All right. The last section of our big ideas for 2017, and then there's a party. You smile all anticipation of the party? Well, we're going to do something different. We had actually several things different from the last big ideas. We had a repeat with Ed Summers, and now we have a remote contribution. Vyas Venugopalan is an analytic consultant for business analytics in Sydney, and he will be presenting live at 7 a.m. there, and he's excited. Vyas had the opportunity to live and experience cultures of the United Emirates, India, Singapore, Canada, and now lives in Australia. He hopes to combine his unique life experiences with his love for technology in his pursuit to improve the human condition, and his talk could not be more perfect match for that pursuit. And you knew there was going to be a blockchain talk somewhere today. Can the blockchain transform how we engage with the homeless? Jason Sikowski, our second presenter, is software development manager in R&D. Jason's team works on cloud analytics services, and outside of SaaS, Jason enjoys The Rowing Machine, David Baldacci novels, and date nights with his wife. I know Jason as an exquisite manager and Mr. Data Step to me. Jason believes that strong personal connections inspire great software. That's what he'll talk about. And our closer today is Jared Peterson, Senior Manager of Advanced Analytics R&D. Jared runs the cognitive computing R&D team. When he's not at work, he enjoys spending time with his wife and 4 kids, volunteering with local nonprofits, and, like me, playing music. At SAS for 5.5 years, Jared will talk about a deeply personal experience, dying for significance. Enjoy. Vyas?
So I grew up in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and the UAE had a fundamentally different approach to poverty and homelessness. The laws were very clear. So if you're caught begging, you'd get arrested and you get deported from the country. So for the first 18 years of my life, I never really understood the scale and the size of poverty as an issue till I first moved to India. Now, where the UAE manages homelessness and poverty by forcing it out, India had learned to live with it, coexisting side by side with the poorest part of its population. Take the Dharavi slums in Mumbai, for example, that houses anywhere from about 750,000 to 1 million people in the same area of about 530 acres. That's that many people in an area of just over half the size of the SAS campus. I find that fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. And I spent many years in India just overwhelmed and feeling helpless at my inability to solve the issue. But I picked up a few interesting things along the way. Now, most countries deal with the homeless and the poor somewhere along the spectrum of the 2 cases that I've described here. But there's one stark similarity wherever you go in the world, and that is this. Now, try and imagine your favorite street in any town, city, or suburb. It's busy and you have crowds going back and forth. And then you have the homeless. They're invisible and they're almost one with the city walls. Wave after wave of people, we all walk on right by, trying to step out of their way and avoiding any eye contact. And that is true anywhere you go in the world, independent of geography and independent of culture. And there's a few reasons why we do this. We might believe that the money we give to the homeless could actually encourage homelessness in some way. It could actually be used to buy drugs. Some of us are introverted or we fear the homeless. We believe the system itself is broken, so any of the money that we give to the homeless in terms of charity is absorbed by the charity. We just don't care in some cases. And then there's those like me who are just overwhelmed by the size and the scale of all these issues, and we kind of tend to assume that I alone can't change anything. And then you often end up doing nothing at all. But what if I told you there was a way to actually reframe the problem itself? Rather than looking at homelessness as a problem to be solved, what if we could look at it as an ecosystem that will always exist for the duration of our socioeconomic constructs? Now, our search kind of changes from trying to find the solution to a problem to trying and finding an opportunity for this ecosystem. Now, let me explain that in a different way. Traditionally, our approach was to assume that the solution to homelessness was about money. You spend enough or you donate enough, and potentially the problem would go away. What if we looked at the homeless, though, as part of an ecosystem in this way? On the one side, there's us. There's you and I, and we interact with our financial systems, and we use credit and debit cards, and we have smartphone apps. We have the many homeless that we want to help. And then we have these services that could be potentially of big value to them. And that's the supply side. We want to be able to connect that back somehow. And I picked up a few insights here. The first one came from my granddad. He's 90 years old today, sitting in that exact same spot about 20 years ago. Now, my granddad was a pensioner as long as I've known him, and he used to have beggars come by home every day throughout the day asking for spare change. And I used to watch in complete frustration as he used to take out this rusty tin can filled with 10 paise coins, and 10 paise is just about 0.2 cents, and proceed to not give more than a few coins to the same poor person. And he used to explain this to me, saying that the same person would go home to home to home, and by the end of the evening, they'd have collected the money that they needed to buy their meals. Now, he knew that this worked because the same people had been coming back for years. None of them had gone away. And he told me that somewhere the key was for it to be painless for someone like him, a pensioner, to be able to donate. Now, I realized that looking back at that busy street, somewhere the reality was we didn't need that entire wave of people we didn't need a few of them to donate significantly large amounts. What we needed was for all of us to be able to give our spare change out. And that brought me to that first idea of micro donations. And what if we had an app where every time you made a transaction, say you bought a cup of coffee for about $2.95, it set aside your 5 cents as spare change and set that aside for donation. Say you bought a cup of coffee or you bought a flat screen TV, it doesn't matter. It just sets the small change aside. That's micro donations in a nutshell. It's slow, but it's steady. But that's the input side. On the other side, you have the services. And you have all these corporations that, say if you're a recruitment agency, potentially you hold life-changing opportunities for the homeless. But there's very little economic incentive to sell to the homeless. There's no money there. And that brought me to my second insight. Now, back in the late 80s and the early 90s, Indian consumer goods companies were struggling to sell any more of their products to the homeless or to the poor because if you're living on less than 50 cents a day, which is India's definition of the poverty line, you don't really care about a bottle of shampoo or anything else. The real breakthrough, though, happened when Kevin Care, that was an Indian startup at the end of 80s, in the end of the 1980s, started to sell their products in sachets. That's about 10 milliliter in size, but look roughly like a ketchup sachet, costing not more than 2 cents a piece. And the market exploded. And today, Unilever alone sells about 27 billion sachets in India alone. And as a follow-on to that, you can see all these corporations now try to educate the poor and try to engage with them because somewhere now an economic incentive exists for that. And that brought me to the realization somewhere that the economic value of money is relative. It's not absolute. That is to say that it doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters is how much money you have with respect to everybody else. So as an individual, the homeless aren't very interesting for a corporation. But what if there was a way to be able to look at their combined income en masse received from donations or any other source? Would that give corporations the opportunity or the incentive to try and create products specifically for the homeless, say if you're a recruitment company? Now, when you look at all these three pieces, there's clearly a big missing piece here, and that's the biggest part of the puzzle. It's the ability to be able to link and end-to-end and distribute trust in a way that you, the donor, know where your money has been used. You don't want it to be used for drugs. The services are able to see how much money exists in the system to target. And the homeless themselves know that we have got them supported from both ends of the ecosystem. So the ability to distribute trust. And that's really where the blockchain just starts to arrive as the hero of the story. Now let's start to look at what the blockchain means. Let's try and understand what the fundamental idea is and the opportunity presented by the blockchain is, stripped of all of its technical complexities. In any traditional financial system, we usually interact in very much the same way. There's you and I, and there's a central bank that maintains a ledger and that tracks every transaction that has gone in and out of the system. So every time someone sends money to anybody else, the bank updates its ledger, and we treat the bank as the central authority of trust to know who has how much money, when and where in the system. All the blockchain does is to take that exact same idea, flip it around on its head, and say, what if we didn't have a central authority? What if we could distribute the exact same ledger to everybody in the ecosystem? And now, every time money or financials are transferred between each personality, the entire set of ledgers are updated in real time. So essentially, you have this ability now where every participant knows who has money, where, and how much is owed at any part of the system. So very quickly, you start to distribute trust. Most of us have, in some way, shape, or form, heard of Bitcoin by now. Bitcoin is quite simply nothing but the token or the currency that is being used to track transactions between the participants on the Bitcoin blockchain. Very similar to how you'd use the dollar to track transactions in our regular economy. Hopefully by now, all the little pieces have started to fall in place. I've spoken about the three participants in the ecosystem, their specific needs, the requirement to be able to distribute trust between each other, and how the blockchain delivers exactly that. And let's try and put that into a little bit more context. Now, what if we created a brand new blockchain where we had the exact same set of participants, but now each one of them has a unique identifier, unique account, very similar to how you have a bank account. And each time you made a transaction now, the spare change was collected, recorded on the blockchain, and the blockchain creates a brand new token, very similar to how you have Bitcoin. And let's call it the SAS coin. But what you have now is the ability to allocate these tokens to any recipient as you see fit, who then in turn can redeem these tokens for the services that they require. And these services, whether they're the corporations, can convert those back into dollars, into real currency. So in end-to-end, you have a situation where every participant in the network, because they are hosted on the blockchain, have a clear view of where the finances have gone. You as a donor, where the money has been used, so you have no reason to not trust it. The token is useless to buy any drugs or anything like that. But most importantly, corporations potentially have an opportunity now to look at the homeless and say, could we create a brand new service for them? So going back to our insights, there's painless donations there. There's the incentive to sell there. And there's now that end-to-end support that the homeless need on both ends of the ecosystem. And that brings me to my big idea. As I looked at this and as I put the presentation together and asked myself, what was the big idea? Was it about what I just showed you now? Or was it about the blockchain? Or was it about the transformative power of technology? They're all good ideas for me. But I think the truly deep idea for me was about the role that we play in the many challenges that the world has today. It takes me back to the point when I first encountered homelessness, and I was overwhelmed by it, because somewhere I felt responsible for the many things I saw around me and the way that I lived my life. And I realized somewhere that we have this inherent ability to look at all the issues that the world has today and assume somebody else is solving it. And that's not okay. And because somewhere we aren't removed from the system. We're very much a part of it. The same financial systems that work for all of us and make our lives the way they are haven't worked for so many else, and they've left the poor behind and the homeless behind. The same supermarkets that allow us to get the best of food from around the world on our tables today have encouraged factory farming and the mindless torture of millions of animals every day. The same vehicles that we drive in comfort have caused climate change-related food and water shortages in the poorest part of the world. And we know all of this. And yet we go on every day supporting systems that enable a few of us to live, but that don't work for all of us. And that's when I realized somewhere that we are not responsible for all these issues, but we are accountable for it. And it's not incumbent on each one of us to try and solve the issue. But at the very minimum, we have to try. And the last thing I realized was that money wasn't the solution to everything. Just throwing more money at it wouldn't make anything different. Somewhere what was missing was the will and the applying of your intellect to try and solve the problem and find an answer. Because donations alone were noble in their intent, but they still somehow assumed that somebody else was going to use that money and solve the problem while I went about my day-to-day life. And that was the big idea for me. It was to realize somewhere that the underlying problems for all the challenges in the world today are not caused by broken financial economic models. They're caused by the lack of accountability and will on our parts every single day. And this is how I think we can change some of it. On the one part, we can go about living every day like we always have. You look at your opportunities ahead, you hear all the news about the refugee crisis or whether it's human trafficking or about poverty, and you say, that's really sad, and it truly breaks your heart, but you do nothing about it. Or on the other side, you pick the route of hope and the route of opportunity, where you look at all these issues and you say, it doesn't matter that you don't have the ability to solve it. But at the very minimum, what you're going to do is try and find an answer for change. And this is how I do it. First, adopt a cause. There are many of them, and it's easy to get overwhelmed, but pick the one cause that shakes you at your core and breaks your heart. Look up 80,000hours.org. It's a good place to start when you're trying to find which causes don't have the most support. Make that your purpose somewhere. Seek answers. Try and spend at least about 30 minutes a day, not trying to just go about your day-to-day life, but trying to find out, what causes these issues? What is the reality and the opportunities presented here? Because when you look at the ideas presented today, whether it's micro donations or whether it's the blockchain, none of that is essentially new. What was required of me was to pick those ideas and repackage them and to repurpose them and somehow combine them in a way that approach the problem in a brand new way. Make that your purpose. But lastly, most importantly, organize and get together with your colleagues, your family, your friends, get them all to adopt a cause and work together and keep a tab on each other and make sure we're pushing forward in a way that works for everybody. Right now, if you look around you, we're surrounded by some of the smartest minds in the world. Use that, make that your purpose. Somewhere, I know what my purpose is. is to be able to walk down that street again and not have to look away. To know that I've looked at the issue head on, and at the very minimum, the least I could have done is push forward by having looked for an answer and looked for change. You adopt, you seek answers, and you organize. And just like that, I hope you find your purpose in changing the world as well. Thank you.
Wow, and wow, we have still a full house at the end of the big ideas. A couple questions. I'm going to start with you, Vyas. Blockchain, I've been following technology for a while now. What are some other applications that you can see where we can use blockchain technology to better the human existence?
So there's a couple of things, and I think the main idea here that was most important for me was the ability to distribute trust and how that changes different things around. Just to look at an entirely different problem that came up at the site as well. We've heard about the issues with large-scale fashion companies, for example, abusing low-cost workers in the poorest parts of the world for a profit. Now, what if you took that exact same model, that ecosystem that I drew out, and say, you have us on the one side, in the middle you have, say, a new kind of store, and on the third side, instead of the services, you now have the actual tailors doing the stitching and everything. You now have the ability to trace your transactions all the way to getting paid at the end. And I think when you look at the ability to do that, you're approaching the same problem in an entirely new way. And there's many such cases of that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea of how much we've heard today about trust. Trust in a positive way, trust that could be used for nefarious, but here's a different form of trust through technology. In fact, trust that is established through technology of people that would otherwise, or participants that would otherwise not have to trust each other. Yeah. A good application that I saw recently was in a Scandinavian country where blockchain was used to establish financial credibility for refugees that arrive with no paperwork. They don't have credit cards, they don't have credit history, but through a blockchain, track all the financial transactions so you can build up financial history and credibility. One-on-ones, we all love them. You mastered them. I have, let's say, 15 members on my team, 20 members on my team. Where do I find the time for all the one-on-ones? I'm just saying what somebody might say. Who has listened to the presentation. I'm paraphrasing.
Right. Hey, it's a matter of priorities. I don't know. I think about my job as we have a certain set of projects that we're working to complete, and I have to work through my staff. And the best way for me to know what's going on and to make sure that they're happy and having a great time doing what they're doing is through these one-on-ones. And oddly enough, I feel like I've found time. Instead of me bopping around and talking with everybody and walking around all the time, it's nice to have that dedicated time to just think and talk about what they're doing. It's more concentrated instead of just being these little nibbles.
Yeah, I liked how you presented it as a productivity tool, because it actually improves communication. Everybody's on the same page about things.
Right.
And it behooves us, and we've heard this in communication surveys, to explain exactly what the strategy and what the direction is, and what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that every employee, every team member can understand his and her part in how they contribute to the company goals. And I'll certainly take this as one of my marching orders to continue my communication as we move forward. I love communication. Jared, very powerful.
Thank you.
What would you have done if the SAS Healthcare Center wasn't available?
I like to think that I would have found another doctor's office, but I might not be here. My wife can tell you that it's like, it's a tough thing to get me to go. And the combination of it being close and Dr. Marshall being there are...
Yeah, I still remember receiving that email when you were diagnosed, when you were in a hospital, and they didn't let you go. It's incredible. Yeah. You said it changed your outlook on work.
Yeah.
I'm sure it affected your outlook on other things beyond work as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you've come face to face with your mortality like that, it tends to flavor a lot of things. Personal relationships. You look at conversations with your wife, with your kids, a lot differently. Yeah, a flood of emotion can come at a very random time. But I like to think that, now my wife and kids might argue with you, or argue with me, but I like to think that it's caused me to appreciate those things a little bit more deeply. So, yeah.
Vyas, how do you think SAS can implement blockchain technology? Where do you see blockchain fit into our portfolio?
Well, I think from the other side, the blockchain, what it really does is to be able to distribute and manage information in a very different way, right? And even if you look at the example that I presented here, what I've described is the underlying infrastructure. But what really drives the change is to be able to see the story and the outcomes and see how people's lives have transformed out of this. Without that, it goes nowhere. And I think that's the most fundamental role that SAS has the ability to play. It's to look at blockchain simply as a new data source and use the very powerful storytelling capabilities we have with all of our tools to be able to show that in a better way and an easier way, in a way that everybody understands. That drives change for me more than anything else.
Questions from the floor?
This is a question for a friend of mine, not really for me. But Jason, you talked about how you see the one-on-ones weekly really working for you. I was wondering if you could compare that to like quarterly or annually, if you found some additional benefits of doing it more frequently. And also, if you can talk a little bit about the boundary between micromanagement and using the one-on-ones in a positive way.
Yeah, so I like the week-long, I like it being weekly because people can remember what they've done over the last week. When it goes to like every other week, it can be really difficult, I think, at that time to remember what happened at the beginning of 2 weeks ago. So if you can afford to do it every week, if you've got a lot of staff, maybe some people have to go, you have to do it every other week with them. But if it was monthly, it starts to turn more into a report. Like somebody wants to bring something written in a PowerPoint or something like this to say what they've been doing. So anything longer than a week or two, it just seems like you're not being able to have that storytelling or to hear what's going on with someone. In terms of the micromanaging, I don't know that I'm detail managing in the one-on-ones. I guess you could ask my staff. Some of them are here.
They're all shaking their head. Yes, 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 yes.
But I really do try to work through them. I mean, to be honest, I can't do all of the things that they know how to do, so it's really hard for me to get in there and say, oh, you need to put the semicolon right here. I don't know how to do that necessarily. So I don't know. I don't know that it's really focused around on what they want to bring to the meeting, and I can give feedback if they ask for that.
Thank you, David.
Quick question to just think about on blockchain. Recently, I just read an article about how doing analytics on blockchain is going to be a really big challenge. So, have you thought about how? Again, we're usually database or data source agnostic. How is SAS going to be able to sort of break that key for blockchains to be able to do analytics on massive amounts of data when blockchain isn't necessarily engineered for that type of analysis?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's one of the, what I've been doing over the last couple of months is to actually try and build this out at a very small level. And, starting with one end, just one person on the one side, one homeless on the other side, and see how we can connect that out somewhere. And I've realized that is something that we have to challenge with, essentially because the data itself is distributed in some way. But some of the solutions that have been proposed to me is to not look at running analytics on the blockchain necessarily, but to be able to take that data out and study it separately. Because what we're trying to see is where the money has gone or where the transactions have happened, not necessarily to analyze it within the blockchain itself. As long as we can do that real time and show the story separately, maybe that's the way we work around it.
I think there are opportunities for analytics operating inside a blockchain, not just view it as a data infrastructure, like RDBMS or a flat file. It's just a data infrastructure. I don't think of it as much as distributed. I think of it as replicated. So if you have access to a chain somewhere, you have access to the same information on any place. So one chain is enough because they all contain the same information. Now, what is that information in there, and how do analytics apply? If you can extract the Bitcoin blockchain, right? There are APIs to that. You can go and suck it down. It's a couple gigabytes large. But what really is the information in there is what key transferred how many Bitcoins to another key.
Right.
How much analytics can we really do with this? But it gets really interesting depending on what information is in those chains. And the other area where analytics can play a role is in smart contracts. That's when actually the unraveling or the execution of a task is built through software into the blockchain. Imagine you build a house and there's a smart contract inside the blockchain that says when these steps have happened, then a payment is made to the builder. And so you can escrow your payments and it will be doled out at the time that the contract is being executed. Analytics can play a role in this. Analytics can play a role in a blockchain where we track financial reputation, just like we have scoring algorithms that return a FICO score or a credit score. There's analytics involved in that. But to me, that is fundamentally no different than executing analytics inside a database. It's just operating on the data that is inside a data infrastructure.
And I'd actually say that's the big difference, to be able to not just analyze the information, but the outcomes that have happened outside of the blockchain. How have things changed?
All right, if there are no more questions, please thank again our speakers. Not just those speakers, all of them. And I'm going to ask all speakers to hang around for a photo op in a minute. This concludes the second installment of Big Ideas. Before you all run off, I want to use the last 2 minutes or so to really thank the folks who've been involved in this. This takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work. One of the most rewarding things of this Big Ideas event is being really close to it. I want to participate in every rehearsal. I want to participate in the full day because you get a sense of the personal growth of every presenter. And the quality of the presentations is really stunning. Now, there are several things that play into this. Their willingness and their courage to go out there and present, but also the training they receive. And I want to recognize Glenna Griffin for her exquisite job she's done with this team. So I want to thank Oida Coleman for her vision. She helped me come up with the idea. It was her idea. I'm just running with it. It is. Lane Watley for the flawless execution. Again, Glenna Griffin, Jason Huckabee in training for the extraordinary guidance and dedication to the speakers. It's very time-consuming. I think, I don't know how many thousands of emails you've exchanged and personal meetings you had with speakers, but it does show. Anna Bird and the production team for putting on this show, and we'll make the videos available later on. Sharon Weaver, Renee Sember, and Jason Huck for taking care of all the many, many million details it takes to put together this event. And of course, the 14 Big Ideas presenters. Thank you very much.